I've lots of stories about my husband because we were together for a long time and we did lots of things together. But this story is before we were married, and the date was December the 1st, 1948. And my husband was a medical student at Laval University in Quebec City, and he asked me out for a date, and I was taking a few courses at Laval. And in those days, you didn't go out with anybody unless your parents had met them. So my parents had never met this young man. Who is he? Bring him to the house first. So he came to the house, and we had a visit with my mom and dad, and then we went out for dinner and dancing at the Chateau Frontenac in Quebec City. And it was all very pleasant. It was a nice evening. And the next day, a courier came to our house with a dozen roses and a thank you note for the date. And I remember putting the roses into a vase and then thinking I was going to put them in the living room. I was so pleased with them. Then I put them in the den, because in those days there was no television. You sat down in the den to listen to the radio or read. So there were my roses. So I don't know how many days went by, but several days, maybe a week, I don't know. And my husband appeared at the house. I was not home. So he asked to speak to my mother. And my mother came to the door, and he said, "Did Anne like the roses?" "Oh, yes," she said, "they're still living, and they're great." And he said, "May I have the roses back?" My mother said, "Pardon me? You want the roses back?" He said yes, and he never said why. And so she went and got the roses and gave them to him. And then later on that day I came home, went into the den, and I said, "Where are my roses?" And she said, "Oh, I guess the maid put them away." So she said to me, "Who was that young man you went out with?" And so I said, "Oh, he's already phoned and asked me out on a second date." And she said, "Well, I think you should have him come here, and your dad and I will meet him first." So, okay. So he did. He came to pick me up. And when he came in, he gave me these. A rosary he had made. My dozen roses from my first date in December the 1st, 1948. The story doesn't end there, because many years later, I used to put this in a little bag, and I used to use it quite a lot in the beginning, but then I sort of forgot about it. So many years later, when my children, my 3 girls, were looking through my jewelry at one time, they saw this little bag and they said, "Oh, what's in this?" And I said, "Oh, I've forgotten, that's my rosary. I'll tell you the story about it." And so they opened the bag, and as the rosary came out, it was the most beautiful odor of roses. So that's my story of the rosary. No, it's not. There's an end to it. And they go on forever, these stories. The end of it is the very last day. It was July the 6th, 1997, and we were planning a family reunion. And the children by this time were married and lived in different parts, from Hong Kong, some of them, and in the States. And we were going to have a family reunion. It was going to start on the Tuesday. This was Sunday, a Sunday night. And my husband went out to buy the New York Times that he bought every week. And then at the same time, he brought a dozen roses he bought, and he came back and he gave them to me. And we had dinner, just the two of us. And then during the evening, we sat down and talked about what we were going to do for this family reunion. We had ordered a boat so we could have a trip for a couple of days with the children and so on. We were talking about it. My husband was saying how grateful he was that we'd had such a good life and that the children all spoke to each other, and it was great. And then it was about 10 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden, I was talking to him. He put his hand over, like this, over his heart. He put his head down, and he died of a massive heart attack. So that's the end of the story of the roses, is that he gave me a dozen roses when he started going out with me, and he gave me a dozen roses the day he died.